Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10, and it's Tuesday, so there must be a new Prime Minister on the way. The old one will be on a bike in about 15 minutes' time. I am compelled to take it all live today. I don't feel that is an undue burden, but I am wondering how many times we have to see a change of guard at 10 Downing Street before organisations like LBC decide that it's not worth covering live, because it'll be happening again in a fortnight or a month. How long did Liz Truss last? 45 days, give or take an hour or two. How long will her speech last today? Well, find out live in 10 minutes' time. I would urge you to be conscious of the dangers of being overcome with excitement on a morning such as this. Liz Truss, one of the greatest orators, of course, in the history of British politics, a Cicero for our times, a Churchillian figure by all accounts. Love her or loathe her, no one can deny that when Liz Truss draws breath, a nation pauses and hangs upon her every syllable. Rarely has oratory reached such dizzy heights of content and substance. So I think it is a matter of duty, frankly, to cross live to 10 Downing Street to hear Liz Truss's valedictory words as she departs from the highest office in the land. And then we have possibly the only man in the United Kingdom who can hold a candle to her when it comes to the power of public speaking, Rishi Sunak, who yesterday provided an absolute masterclass in how holding an audience in the palm of his hand as he spoke, strangely unfocused, looking down the wrong camera before shuffling diffidently off the stage. I, for one, can't wait. And if all of that were not enough to have you teetering upon the edge of terminal excitement, LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood, joins me this morning to talk us through events, dear boy. Events.
Would you like to know exactly what's going to happen?
Not really, but I feel that we probably should reveal it.
Burst my balloon. In about 10 minutes' time, Liz Truss is going to walk out of that famous black door, number 10 Downing Street. She's going to go up to the lectern, which looks like a Jenga tower, and she's going to give a speech which will probably last about 4 or 5 minutes, maybe even shorter, to be honest, given...
Is that all? Surely.
Where she will outline the fact that the mandate on which she was elected was not possible to deliver because her party didn't support it, and a lot of it contained in that mini budget of September the 23rd wasn't actually in her promises over the 7-week election campaign. She will then get in her prime ministerial car for the last time, and she will go to Buckingham Palace, where she will be met by, or she will meet, I should say, King Charles III, and she will hand in her resignation to King Charles III. Once her car has departed Buckingham Palace, Rishi Sunak will make the journey to meet the King and ask to form a government, and the King is expected to grant that request, and then he will return to Downing Street at about 11:35 and give a speech outlining his plans for the next 2 years before a general election.
So that would be quite a long speech, will it? Or
probably 7 or 8 minutes. It won't be any longer than that, I wouldn't have thought.
Okay.
But that's the formalities, and then we'd expect straight afterwards we'd get the announcements of cabinet positions from Rishi Sunak. We're expecting Jeremy Hunt to remain as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Dominic Raab.
Oh, let joy be unconfined.
Because you've got history with Dominic Raab. He's expected to go into the Home Office.
Of course he is.
Because, of course, he was a loyalist to Rishi Sunak right through the summer. Actually,
what about poor old Grant Shapps? He's been Home Secretary for at least 10 minutes.
He's been Home Secretary for less than a week. Grant Shapps, he may well remain as Home Secretary if Dominic Raab doesn't get that job, but he's expected to get a senior post within the government, having helped to orchestrate the leadership campaign, very short campaign, to muster enough MPs to freeze out Penny Mordaunt yesterday.
Right. Raab in the Home Office.
Suella Braverman.
Foreign Secretary?
No, Suella Braverman, Justice Secretary with him.
What was she last time? Foreign Secretary?
No, she was Home Secretary.
Home Secretary. Okay, Justice Secretary, who's moving out of that one then? Who's there? I bet you can't remember. See, you're a political editor of a national radio station and one of the great sages of our time. That's not sarcasm, by the way. I sound like I was talking about Liz Truss's oratorical skills when I was describing Theo Usherwood's journalistic nous. You're making noises again.
I'm not making noises. I'm not making noises.
You do make noises.
I don't make noises.
You make noises without realising it.
Okay, well,
it's because when it's like thinking out loud, you sort of go... Play the tape back. No, we can't.
No,
That's
we
a very
can't.
important.
So now
political matter.
starting to see MP supporters of Liz Truss coming out onto the steps of number 11 Downing Street and number 10.
Who are they
Downing
then?
Street. So we have Therese
there,
Coffey,
of
the
course.
Deputy
Who are the
Prime Minister.
others?
I think I saw there are a few faces I recognise who
go on
work in
then.
Conservative Party headquarters.
So what about MPs apart from Therese Coffey?
I saw Alex Stafford, the MP. He's an MP.
Is he?
Yes, he is an MP.
I'm sure his mum's very proud.
He went into Downing Street. But what is noticeable, James, and because I was down there earlier, is there a significant...
Therese Coffey just took a selfie. Carry on, Theo.
There are fewer MPs gathered in Downing Street than those who gathered for Boris Johnson only 50 days ago when he left Downing Street for the last time. There were more than 100 then for Mr. Johnson. This time around, it's a much smaller audience.
Holiday. I was off for that, wasn't I?
Yeah.
I thought I was having a senior moment. I thought, good God, was it only 50 days ago? I cannot remember any of it. Any of it.
So Therese Coffey's sort of clasping her hands, waiting for Liz Truss to come out. We're expecting Liz Truss to be fairly punctual. Sometimes these things can run over, but given that King Charles III will be waiting to receive...
So he's
Prime
currently
Minister.
treating Buckingham Palace as the office, isn't he?
Yes,
He's still living at Clarence House. So
Yes.
the BBC
It's a working
showing
residence.
him he's just made his way into what must be the largest office in the history of offices, isn't it? It's incredible.
Prime commercial
Flipping heck.
resi, yeah.
Do you know who's working from home?
Who's working from home?
You'll never guess.
Go on.
Have a guess.
Go on.
Rupert Murdoch.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, but it's in the sort of shareholders report for News Corp. Is that he's officially working from home most of the time. So it puts a slightly different complexion on all the Rupert Murdoch papers that were attacking people from and indeed Rupert Murdoch acolytes who were attacking people for working from home for the last couple of years. But I digress. Prince Charles does not actually work from home, oddly, even though the Queen did, because Buckingham Palace is not currently his home. His home is still Clarence House, which is about
100 yards away.
100 yards away?
100 yards.
Yeah, and I believe he took a car, obviously for security reasons, and so he is now preparing himself.
We can see him in the Royal Daimler.
Well, you say we can, but nobody else listening can they?
So let me describe. King Charles is in his Royal Daimler, making his way 100 yards down the Mall from Clarence House.
That's old. That's not him.
That is.
He's already gone in.
No, I'm just describing.
No, I know you are, but
Yeah,
that's
sorry.
not. He's already in.
Oh.
Seriously, pop the kettle on, waiting for Liz Truss to turn up. He's got some nice Dutchy original tea bags, getting ready,
The oat cakes are
warming
really
the
nice.
pot. Do you think he's a milk first or milk second man?
Second.
Do you? I don't think he's ever made a cup of tea in his life, Theo. What are you talking about? It's 11 or nearly 12 minutes after 10, and the attention of the world is focused on the door of 10 Downing Street, where... Someone with a similar haircut to Liz Truss just came out of the door, and then we all had a little moment. We had a little moment there, didn't we? We had a little moment. And then, as I have mentioned before, one of the finest political orators of the 20th and 21st century, in fact, possibly of all time, one of the greatest speakers in the history of speech, Elizabeth Truss, will be delivering her valedictory address to an adoring nation after 45 days as Prime Minister. A brief word, Theo, if you would, upon just how catastrophically awful her premiership has proved to be.
It's been the shortest, sharpest failure in British political history. There's no doubt about it. She entered Downing Street on the 6th of September. She gave a mini budget 2 weeks later, and she was only, it should be said, James, that she had 11 days grace when there was no politics following the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the period of national mourning, which meant that you could have no political point scoring in that space of time. Following the period of national mourning, of course, Queen Elizabeth II's funeral, state funeral, you then had this mini budget, which was heralded by Liz Truss and the think tanks that were around her and supported her leadership, and as a major step forward in making Britain more competitive again. And because it failed, she's now out.
Although I noticed one of Rishi Sunak's key advisors is a former alumnus of the curiously misnomered and secretly funded Institute of Economic Affairs. So, you'd have thought that if there were any justice in the world, the fact that they finally got to influence a government and the government turned out to be the worst in the history of governments, that people might have shown that lot the door, but not yet, apparently. Popping up, no doubt, on a radio or television programme near you anytime now. Therese Coffey is indeed the only politician who's turned up, the only one in the actual crowd. Now, this is the point where the curse of compassion kicks in for people like you and I, Theo. I actually now, despite finding her politically atrocious, albeit that she remains one of the finest orators in the history of oratory, I now feel sorry for Liz Truss. You would have thought that some of the sort of loyalists might have someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's a very decent and honourable man who's never told a lie in his life or insulted anybody.
It's very sad.
But I mean, so you'd have thought they might just out of common decency, a bit of humanity.
There can't be more than about 20 people there.
No one's going to get into any trouble, are they, for turning up to clap her out?
There are a couple of hundred.
Yeah.
This is almost the story, is just how deserted Downing Street is. Because when you look at Downing Street, imagine you're facing...
This is like having a leaving party and nobody turns up. And you've got you've got the sandwiches just curling at the corners.
So you have
and
Downing
you're thinking,
Street.
I've put 500 quid behind the bar. Can you ask for it back if you put for any landlords listening? If you put 500 quid behind the bar, do you get the you work on the principle that people are gonna drink through the 500 quid you've put behind the bar and then start buying their own drinks. Liz Truss's leaving do. Even her own parents aren't going to turn up, are they? This is
awful. So you face Downing Street, and when Boris Johnson left, even when Theresa May left office, you had supporters, particularly to the left, outside the door of number 11, Downing Street, and you would have, for Boris Johnson, there must have been 100, 150 supporters on both sides. And just looking at Downing Street now, there can't be more than
I hate this.
25,
I genuinely
30.
hate this. Just for the record,
only one politician.
I started the programme being deliberately and possibly even violently sarcastic. I do find this genuinely upsetting because it's on the world stage. And fair play to Therese Coffey, not only for turning up, but also for really trying to jolly the troops along with that selfie and that sort of jolly hockey sticks. I wish I hadn't been so sarcastic now at the top of the show, because people are going to think I'm still being sarcastic now. This is awful. Even if your worst colleague leaves and no one goes to their leaving do, if they've not actually hurt you personally, imagine if Keith were to leave and no one turned up at his leaving do. It would just be awful, whatever you might think about Keith. He's there with his vol au vents and his cheese and pineapple on sticks, and he's waiting the DJ. He's spent ages on the playlist. He's going to do a bit of DJing himself, and it's sort of 7 o'clock. That's all right. They'll be along in a minute. And even if you didn't like Keith, he's not hurt you ever. He's not done anything to upset you personally, and literally nobody is turning up for their leaving do. It's absolutely awful. Poor Keith.
But it is instructive of the fact that Liz Truss never had the support really amongst Conservative MPs. Even on that final, when it got down to the final two, and here she comes.
And here is Liz Truss. Hold on to your hats.
It has been a huge honour to be Prime Minister of this great country. In particular, to lead the nation in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen after 70 years of service, and welcoming the accession of His Majesty King Charles III. In just a short period, this government has acted urgently and decisively on the side of hard-working families and businesses. We reversed the national insurance increase. We helped millions of households with their energy bills and helped thousands of businesses avoid bankruptcy. We are taking back our energy independence, so we are never again beholden to global market fluctuations or malign foreign powers. From my time as Prime Minister, I am more convinced than ever that we need to be bold and confront the challenges that we face. As the Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, it's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult. We simply cannot afford to be a low-growth country where the government takes up an increasing share of our national wealth, and where there are huge divides between different parts of our country. We need to take advantage of our Brexit freedoms to do things differently. This means delivering more freedom for our own citizens and restoring power to democratic institutions. It means lower taxes so people can keep more of the money that they earn. And it means delivering growth that will lead to more job security, higher wages, and greater opportunities for our children and grandchildren. Democracies must be able to deliver for their own people. We must be able to outcompete autocratic regimes where power lies in the hands of a few. And now more than ever, we must support Ukraine in their brave fight against Putin's aggression. Ukraine must prevail, and we must continue to strengthen our nation's defences. That's what I have been striving to achieve, and I wish Rishi Sunak every success for the good of our country. I want to thank Hugh, Francis, Liberty, my family and friends, and all the team at Number 10 for their love, friendship and support. I also want to thank my protection team. I look forward to spending more time in my constituency and continuing to serve South West Norfolk from the backbenches. Our country continues to battle through a storm. But I believe in Britain. I believe in the British people. And I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
10:19, 10:20 is the time. Liz Truss there concluding her valedictory speech as Prime Minister. Up there, I think we can all agree with the Gettysburg Address, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first inaugural address, perhaps even Charles de Gaulle's appeal of the 18th of June. She mentioned Seneca. I would bring Socrates into proceedings at this point and suggest that those words stand comparison with his famous apology.
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 10 and Liz Truss travelling to Buckingham Palace where she will formally resign. And later today, Rishi Sunak will make the same journey in order to tell King Charles III, King Charles, that he is ready to form a new government. What time do we expect to hear from Rishi Sunak, Theo?
11:35.
And that will be a slightly longer speech. How much policy might we expect to be in it? Because what's remarkable, objectively remarkable about the last few days is that we have seen a new Prime Minister anointed who has barely said a word in public since the last one resigned.
Can I put up a defence on that argument?
It's not a defence or an attack. It's just a simple statement of fact. He hasn't said a word in public since the last one resigned. You can explain why we shouldn't read too much into that.
Okay, then I'll try and do that. I think the argument would be from Rishi Sunak and those MPs who backed him is that Rishi Sunak spent 7 weeks over the course of the summer explaining his position. And nothing that Rishi Sunak has said since the summer would give any indication that he would deviate from the policies that he plans to implement.
Then there are some fireworks on the way, aren't there?
Precisely. And then
Starting
on Monday.
If you see Liz Truss as an almost complete abandonment of what went before, Rishi Sunak will be an almost complete abandonment of the complete abandonment of what went before.
But what's interesting in actual fact is that Rishi Sunak, and this is paradoxical, is actually in a stronger position now to deliver his policies than he would have been if Liz Truss hadn't have won that contest.
Great point. And in fact, it's an echo of when he became Chancellor of the Exchequer, because although Boris Johnson appointed him thinking he'd be something of a patsy after Sajid Javid walked away, having refused to essentially bend the knee to Dominic Cummings, remember him, he ended up in an incredibly strong position because Boris Johnson, by most accounts, couldn't have afforded to lose another Chancellor quite so quickly. And there were tensions there, reports that Boris Johnson actually was quite keen on the kind of tax cuts that Liz Truss brought in, but Rishi Sunak wouldn't wear them. So he comes in from a perception of weakness and actually consolidates a position of strength. I hadn't thought of that.
So if you think back to the first Monday of Conservative Party conference, when Kwasi Kwarteng came out and they reversed the abolition of the 45p rate of tax, I went out onto the floor of the Conservative Party conference and started asking backbenchers, is this just the end of it? And they started saying to me, well, actually, no. What we really want to do is go into battle, particularly around the universal credit and the uprating of universal credit in line with inflation. But of course, there are going to be some fantastically difficult decisions to make around universal credit, around defence spending. But at that moment in time in the Conservative Party conference, the view was that this was not something that the government could simply do away with, in terms of not uprating universal credit in line with inflation. They'd have to do it because that's what the government was promising, the Tory MPs were promising their constituents, or felt had been promised their constituents back in April of last year. Given the economic situation now, it is perfectly possible that Rishi Sunak says, actually, this isn't something we can afford. Moving ahead, he's got the chance now for Ben Wallace to get him out of government because he doesn't want to plough ahead with a 3%
4%
on
for
GDP
defence spending. And of
spending.
course, the what we could loosely describe as the headbangers will go tonto about this, won't they? The sort of Christopher Chopes and people like that who will be calling for general elections. So the first challenge is unity, or to actually again take advantage of the majority he's inherited and think perhaps that he can live without the support of 20 or 30 of them.
But if you're somebody like Robert Halfon in Harlow, or you're somebody in a red wall constituency, and you see that you're 30 points down in the polls, there is simply no way you can keep your seat at the moment. And then one of your Christopher Chopes down in Christchurch on the south coast of England turns around and says, actually, I want to bring down the government on this. You're going to have words with Christopher Chope, Sir Christopher Chope, I should say, because he's basically putting you out of a job. If he votes along with Nadine Dorries in Mid-Bedfordshire to bring down the government by voting against Rishi Sunak, he is signing the end of your political career. And so to your point, James, the strength of Rishi Sunak is the weakness of the Conservative Party, because the next move that brings down the government, there is no way that they can get around not having, out of thought, a general election if they decide that they can't wear Rishi Sunak's policies.
Yeah.
Whereas had Rishi Sunak become Prime Minister in September, only last month, and then they'd moved against him, they could have probably gone again with somebody else.
I hear you. And we don't know a great deal about him, oddly. I mean, that's probably why the major talking points revolve around his wealth and his ethnicity. But ideologically?
Well, ideologically, he's a Thatcherite. And what's so perverse in
He's a Thatcherite in circumstances that could not be further removed from the circumstances Margaret Thatcher inherited.
But what Boris Johnson did was he split conservatism just broadly between economy and social, and so you could be, and so those who are economically conservative are actually quite socially liberal. And we have come to describe them as being on the left of the party. But somebody like Jeremy Hunt or Grant Shapps isn't on the left of the Conservative Party. In fact, they're much more right-wing economically than Boris Johnson or any of those who are advocating for a much bigger state and much bigger state intervention. But what the culture wars has done is create this, if you like, a Tea Party right wing with the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Priti Patel. And I use that phrase advisedly, but actually the right of the party is still very much along the same narrative as Rishi Sunak, because they're going to be going for austerity.
Well,
which
yes,
is
except
Cameron
that
and Osborne.
and this is a cautious word of positivity, is that he doesn't seem to be the kind of man to let his politics overcome his pragmatism. Yeah. And that is the difference. That's why I use the word headbanger advisedly. These are the people, if you look at Liz Truss's budget, it was a pursuit of a political position to the exclusion of all.
And you heard it in her speech
reason.
then. I'm not sorry.
I was going to refer to that briefly. I didn't mishear. She was essentially saying, I did everything right.
I did 45 days in office.
I was brilliant.
I did my best, and that's what we need to do. But I'm leaving.
I think I need to take a moment just to reflect upon that. Luckily, Holly Harris is here with your headlines. A quick word on Seneca, a sort of Roman philosopher, and oddly enough, he was a sort of spad, actually. He was a political advisor to Caligula. Make of that what you will. He advised a few emperors. He was very much a sort of Peter Mandelson type figure in ancient Rome. But that quote that Liz Truss chose to say goodbye to Downing Street with could not have been less appropriate in many ways. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. Liz Truss dared to do something extraordinary that made everything worse. It's the polar opposite of what Seneca is talking about. She did dare, and she made things much, much, much more difficult, which makes the whole tone of that farewell speech, frankly, comical. I did absolutely. So for Churchill, it would probably be, we shall fight them on the beaches, wouldn't it? And for Liz Truss, it is, we did absolutely everything right, and it's not our fault. The pound tanked and the economy went off a cliff and the whole world started laughing at us. A strange time, a strange speech. 10:36 is the time. So we don't hear any more from anyone until
11:30. So
30.
Liz Truss is in the
Theophilus
palace
is with me.
now,
Yep.
meeting the king. That meeting is due to conclude in the next 10 minutes or so. Then we will see Rishi Sunak's car enter the gates of Buckingham Palace. He will meet the king, and then once his car has departed, he'll go straight to Downing Street, and he will then make a speech in the street. Same lectern, different prime minister.
And when might we expect the personnel to be pronounced, to be announced?
Sometime, I would imagine, straight after that speech, we'll start to get news of the appointments.
Because he'd have been putting plans together during the leadership campaign, wouldn't he? During the last leadership campaign, the one he lost.
I think those plans would have changed somewhat.
Yes, but not
massively.
unrecognisably.
No, certainly not in terms of the back room.
Jeremy Hunt wouldn't have been his first choice as Chancellor, probably, but the
I'd
benefits
imagine-
of consistency.
I think given that Rishi Sunak will want to stick with that medium-term fiscal plan to be announced on the 31st of October, Jeremy Hunt will stay in post as the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And this is done, the announcements are made on a hierarchical basis. So it will start with the top appointments of Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, and work their way down. And we'll probably get some of the announcements rolled over to tomorrow for the junior ministerial appointments as well.
Indeedy. So do you want to go and have a lie down?
I'll go and have a lie down.
And then we'll get you back at 11:30. I'll try and get a normal phone-in up and running. As one quick word, as the main purpose of this programme over the last few years has, of course, been to ensure that you're not taken by surprise. However mad or awful things get, if you've been listening to this programme, none of it will have surprised you. The utter collapse of Boris Johnson, the unveiling of Jacob Rees-Mogg as one of the most fundamentally dishonourable and dishonest politicians in the history of the United Kingdom, the failure of Liz Truss, the ongoing clown car that is Brexit. Even if you were listening with your fingers in your ear and your teeth gritted, the more you've listened to this particular programme over the last few years, the less surprised you will be by everything that unfolds. Although I confess that today I'm at a bit of a loss. I'm very grateful to Theo for reminding us that Rishi Sunak is a Thatcherite, but he's also a Thatcherite in a less obvious way, which is the recognition of the tension between circumstances and ideas. Liz Truss's ultimate fatal error was to press ahead with ideas regardless of circumstance. Ideas that in an economy that was perhaps doing all right, they may have not been as disastrous as they proved to be, or with a government that wasn't already racking up epic amounts of debt and coming off the back of COVID and picking up the bill for helps with energy bills, the tax cuts could perhaps have been sold to a population. But she brought the ideas and completely ignored the circumstances. Sunak seems to me, and this is probably the nicest thing I can say about him, at first glance, Sunak seems to me to be somebody who will cut his cloth according to circumstances. So while he believes, no doubt, in tax cuts and small government and low intervention, he recognises, as he proved when he handled the furlough scheme, that there are times when you need big government and you need high intervention and you need to channel money from the Treasury to the people. In the case of the furlough, the 7 million or whatever it was salaries that the government essentially picked up for the duration. When it comes to the energy bills, the policy that Liz Truss she retreated from some of it, didn't she, and adopted pretty much entirely the Labour Party's plan on that particular policy. But the help remains in place, and Sunak will understand that the money has to be found. So and one imagines now that the retreat from the tax cuts that Jeremy Hunt has already announced will stay in place. And watch national insurance will be one of the first things to do. But that is an important thing to understand about Rishi Sunak. As far as we know, and we don't know much about him, he recognises the priority of circumstance and facts over politics and ideology. So even if he is a passionate believer in cutting taxes, he will know that there are circumstances in which you can't cut taxes. Liz Truss, for reasons that we'll probably be picking over for years to come, didn't realise that when it rains, people get wet. That was the flaw at the very heart of all of her political thinking. She was a great believer in, I don't know, dry weather politics. And she tried to introduce dry weather politics while it was absolutely raining. 10:40 is the time. So here's my problem now. If I ask you a very specific question, then you will ring me. So if I ask you whether, for example, as someone of Asian heritage or as a person of colour, do you feel uplifted by Rishi Sunak's elevation. And I think, for the record, as a white bloke, I much would prefer to see somebody who seemed to recognise a lot of the inequality and discrimination in this country suffered by people of a similar ethnicity to him, but from a very different background financially and socially. But it is an objectively good thing to have an Asian man in Downing Street. If, like me, you were passionately opposed to racism, how many people today are thinking about that caller we took a few years ago, Steve, who voted for Brexit because he thought there were too many brown faces in his local Sainsbury's? I wonder whether he realised that he was going to set in motion, or help to set in motion, a course of events that would see an Asian man, a man of Indian heritage, moving into Downing Street, a British man of Indian heritage moving into Downing Street. So that is an objectively good thing. And I read Yasmin Alibhai-Brown in The Independent today, in the I newspaper today, quite brilliant on why she isn't celebrating, and why, as a fellow East Asian with a family who fled Uganda, she feels none of the joy in that, and I completely respect that position. I don't think I would argue with her, because I am white and she is not. But for me, objectively, to have a British man of Indian heritage in Downing Street is good, and lots of racists are struggling to absorb or accept it. How many of them are sort of traditional Conservative voters who may now be looking around for a party that is a little bit more welcoming of their bigotries and prejudices? Only time will tell. However, I don't know a lot about him, and that's why I don't really want to ask you a specific question today. I don't want to say, what do you think about having a British Indian in Downing Street? I don't want to say, how do you feel? I may move on to the second bit, which is whether his epic wealth is going to be an issue or going to be a problem. My instinct is that it is. My instinct is that when we are talking to people in the coming months who can't afford to eat, the idea of a man in charge who is as rich as Croesus, actually. I mean, stupid rich, not well off, comfortable, but stupid rich, richer than any person should be, really, in a civilized society. But there it is. So I think that will matter. I think of him as being those famous photographs where he couldn't work out how to use a contactless card in a petrol station. I mean, this to me is worrying, but he may overcome those concerns. I don't, at this point, want to talk to you about his wealth or his ethnicity. I do want to talk to you about him, though, or rather I want you to talk to me about him. 10:43 is the time. The number you need, as always, is 0345 60 60973. And the reason I mention that if I ask you specific questions, I can guarantee that you will ring me. Sometimes if I ask a vague question, it doesn't provide you with enough focus to zone in on. So it's like, but I really want to ask you a vague question today. I'm just kind of asking you to meet me halfway. We'll go back to the laser-like focus either tomorrow or later in the programme. But today I really want to invite you to talk to me about Rishi Sunak from almost any angle you want. So I'm not excluding the two I've just mentioned. If his ethnicity or his wealth are by far the most significant things about him for you, 0345 60 60973 is the number that you need. But I want other things to come in as well. I think that the fact that he has become Prime Minister after only becoming an MP a few years ago, I think it was 2015 he came in, I think that tells us two things. It tells us obviously about the state of British politics, but it also tells us about the state of the Tory party. A man who appears to be vaguely sensible and appears to be free of the ludicrous tribal loyalties that have split the party down the middle. A man who has somehow been portrayed as a centrist Remainer despite being an ardent and lifelong Brexiter. That contradiction might be something we talk about a little later. But the fact that he can actually end up in the top job tells you much more about the Tory party than it does about Rishi Sunak. Somebody who can knot a tie, brush his hair, appear to be vaguely sensible and speak comprehensible English gets the top job, because we've had a succession of people who struggle to do any or all of those things. It's the sheer paucity of talent in the Parliamentary Conservative Party that concerns me most as a patriotic Democrat. It's the absolute shallowness of the talent pool. You see, we thought it was funny, didn't we, when Nadine Dorries was made Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport because it spoke of a madness engulfing the country. And it was a madness that many of us thought Boris Johnson actually appreciated. I still think that he closed the door after appointing her and laughed his silly head off. I thought it was a wonderful, almost like trolling from Downing Street. It's hilarious. He cares about nothing at all. So the idea of putting someone who is less cultured than your average yoghurt into the Department of Culture, Media and Sport would have just tickled him pink as a sort of narcissistic sociopath who cares not a jot about anything except his own amusement and gratification. The promotion of Nadine Dorries was designed entirely to amuse Boris Johnson. But now, who's he going to pick from? Jonathan Gullis is an education minister. Jonathan Gullis. I mean, I almost don't have the words. I like the word paucity, the paucity of talent, the scarcity of integrity. You've seen Jacob Rees-Mogg made business secretary, a man who in July was saying he could never support Rishi Sunak because he's a socialist, and who announced yesterday that he would be supporting Rishi Sunak. Dominic Raab coming back into the cabinet, the man who stayed on his sun lounger when Kabul fell despite being foreign secretary. That's the really scary thing for me, because it's part of the same picture. Rishi Sunak has become prime minister because he looks like a man who can tie his own shoelaces. That's about the level you need after Liz Truss. We need so because Liz Truss did not look like she could tie her own shoelaces. We need someone who can tie their own shoelaces and who doesn't believe that the moon's a balloon. Step forward, Rishi Sunak. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. So that tells you everything you need to know about the party that he leads. But then, of course, he has to appoint a cabinet. He has to appoint a cabinet. Even after people like James Cleverly and Suella Braverman have been promoted to top jobs. I mean, that's terrifying. That is genuinely terrifying. There was a time when we spoke of a cabinet of all the talents, or a government of all the talents. It was Gordon Brown. I think we are edging ever closer with each new Conservative Prime Minister being brought in because they can't stop squabbling among themselves and they've turned their entire party into a circular firing squad. We are perilously close. Kit Malthouse, Matt's just reminded me, got into the cabinet. And Rishi Sunak somehow has to pick from a depleted pool. If Gordon Brown tried to introduce a government of all the talents, Rishi Sunak is in very real risk of presiding over a government of no talent whatsoever.
This is LBC.
10:52 is the time. So an apology for not providing a laser-like focus for you to respond to, but that's how I want to do it today. I want it to be a bit more scattergun. I'd like you to talk to me about Rishi Sunak, what his propulsion to Prime Minister says or means to you, from any angle at all, but it has to be the most important element of your reaction to this development. Christine's in Birmingham. Christine, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Never really spoken to you before.
Why not?
Called LBC
Why not?
A couple of times. I don't know. I listen to you all the time, but I've never actually spoken to you.
What do you think I'm here for? My own entertainment? Unbelievable.
Well, I enjoy listening to you and listening to what everyone else says, but I had to say something this morning. It's about Rishi and the fact, I had a disagreement with my housemate yesterday who was English, and he was saying, it's because all Indians are going to vote for him and blah, blah, blah. I said, what on earth are you talking about, you moron? I don't like him because he's Indian. I don't like him because it's the colour of the skin. I don't like him at all. It's not my politics. I had to say to him, do you not realise in other countries of the world where there is colour, we have a right wing and we have a left wing? It doesn't mean if you are left wing, you have to vote. You have to be black to vote that way. So what about the rest of the world? No.
Well, you put me in an horrible position now. I'm not going to argue with you about how you feel. But I do think, you have to recognise...
I don't like him because of the fact I don't like his politics.
No, same here. I don't like his politics either. But you can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. It is good that a UK Prime Minister has Indian heritage. In a country that not long ago was dancing to the tune of people like Enoch Powell, this has got to be seen as progress, even if you find his politics repellent.
not disputing that, but the point of it is that a lot of people don't realise the reason why Rishi didn't win the first time around, and I said this to my English housemate, is because he was Indian. No one wanted to come out and say it at the time, but that was the elephant in the room. I sat there and I listened to all their little things on the television, and I'm not a Tory person, but I wanted to think, well, you know what? I don't have a choice. I've got these morons in for the next 2 years. I listened to everything. And out of the two of them, I said, Liz Truss is talking absolute rubbish. Now, here I am, East London girl, went to grammar school, like Theresa May, turned into a comprehensive. I'm 61. I got O-level C maths. I could have told her what she was going to say was going to go poops up.
Yes.
It was absolute rubbish. As Kwasi Kwarteng spoke, I was watching Bloomberg and I could see the pound just tumble as the man was talking.
It was a very strange chapter in our political history. And
that's the reason why Liz Truss got in, is because the Conservatives didn't want an Indian, who I've heard some of them say he's too clever for his own good. What does that mean?
Well, I have had that explained to me, because I that is coded racism for an awful lot of people. And
Thank you.
Sometimes I need a little bit of help understanding those things. So what they're really saying, he's far too clever for a person of colour.
Exactly. Now,
because these are the same people that think Jacob Rees-Mogg is a genius.
Oh, please, that man's a moron, an absolute. He reminds me of Where's Waldo.
Who's that?
You know, the little cartoon. It's an American cartoon.
Where's Wally?
Get your friends.
He does that. Well, that's a physical resemblance. I don't know that we're particularly. I don't know how much we know about Where's Wally's.
He seems to have as much intelligence as that, as far as I'm concerned. Because if you can go into the House of Commons and lounge on the settee as if I'm lounging in my house, then and tell me that is how a government minister is supposed to behave, then excuse me, I'm living in a different universe. Well,
I'm living. I think I'm living in the one that you inhabit. So, just to clarify, I mean, Sunak's probably an improvement on Truss, but that's a bit like saying that turning the radiator up to 1 is an improvement on 0.
0. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. And the ethnicity, I mean, it's weird that you're the first person to ring in today, because in many ways I don't think we should be talking about his ethnicity. I think we both agree that it's a mark of progress. It's clearly going to upset, racists.
Did you not hear your own radio station over the weekend with people calling in, saying to your presenters, because I listen to LBC.
No, I know, but they're brilliant. We've got lots of brilliant presenters here. We all approach things differently. I'm just explaining my approach. And my approach is perhaps the reason why we're talking about his wealth and his ethnicity so much is because we don't know anything else about him at the moment.
Well, that's all we do know about him. Yeah. And I mean, I don't mean to be rude. The fact that the man's got a pair of Prada shoes, I've got no money. You can buy a second-hand Prada bag on eBay.
Yeah, I'm going to go in on this one, and I'm going to suggest to you, there's no way his Prada shoes are second-hand, Christine.
Very true, very true. But I'm just saying it's not an elitist thing.
I think people need to be more intelligent. If you're going to criticise him for his wealth, it has to be about something that influences his behaviour rather than something that he wears on his feet. Christine, I look forward to you ringing me again. I really do. I can't believe you've waited so long. It's 10:57 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Theo has wandered back into the studio. Always a delight to see you.
Liz Truss's premiership is finally over. We have a notice from Buckingham Palace. The Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss MP had an audience with the King this morning and tendered her resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which His Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. And so endeth the Liz Truss era as Prime Minister.
The Liz Truss era that actually went brilliantly well, according to Liz Truss. In her mind, who does she think did for her?
I think there was certainly a fear amongst from within Liz Truss's team that Conservative MPs had it in for her, and that they were after.
They weren't before the mini budget, were they? They could have. They might have given a benefit of a doubt before the mini budget.
Yes, I think there was a way of salvaging it, but of course the communications that immediately happened, the communication strategy immediately after the mini budget was so bad. There was 6 days of saying nothing. There was then that hour-long set of interviews.
But were they? Sorry, people tell me off for interrupting you, but were they sharpening their knives from the moment she got into Downing Street?
She never had the popularity, so she went to the bank of political capital asking for a huge deposit, which was just never there. It's worth remembering that actually only fewer than a third of MPs, Conservative MPs, backed her to get into the final two.
But were they sharpening their knives from the minute she walked into Downing Street?
She had one chance.
Yes.
We all said it. She had one chance with her own backbenchers and she blew it. That's why she went. And so from the moment the mini-budget went wrong, and then she continued to make missteps in trying to salvage the situation, it was impossible for her I would have said the Conservative Party conference to turn it around. Certainly the Conservative Party conference felt from when I was there and talking to MPs that they were very quickly coming to the view that she had to go.
And that weekend when Kwarteng went around the studio saying, we're going to do more of this.
Well, that was immediately after the Labour Party conference.
Yeah.
And then that precipitated the pound falling off a cliff against the dollar as I was on a train up to Liverpool to the Labour Party conference, just looking at my phone as the pound fell down to $1.03. I mean, it was incredible. And then you had the strategy to try and actually say something to shore up the pound, and it didn't work.
Indeed. As I've said already, the tragedy of Liz Truss is that she failed to understand that when it rains, you get wet.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 11. This will put a bit of snap, crackle and pop in your morning. Jerry in Dorchester writes, I find it amazing that weeks after getting rid of a man obsessed with a British Prime Minister who oversaw the starvation of millions in India, we now have a Prime Minister of Indian heritage, a British Prime Minister of Indian heritage, overseeing the possible starvation of millions in Britain. Crikey. I mean, where to start with that, Jerry? But it certainly brought me up short. So did a poem that has been published on Mumsnet this morning. We have a bit of a rule on this programme. We never do poems unless they are part of the canon, unless they are written by one of the greats. But this poem is such a work of something that I am quite tempted to share elements of it with you. If I read you the first verse, then you can tell me whether you want to hear the rest of it or not, okay? Carrie came to me today and said it was time to go. I looked at her and smiled as I whispered that I know. It's been posted in good faith by a Boris Johnson fan on Mumsnet. It's been brought to my attention. I don't know. It's up to you. Let me know via text, 84850, whether you want to hear the next. There's only 3 more verses. If I told you it got worse, would you believe me? 5 minutes after 11 is the time. If I told you it's going to get worse after Liz Truss, I don't think you would believe me. And I wouldn't tell you that. I don't currently see how it could. He has to be an improvement on what has gone before. But, and this is only a medium-sized but. I like medium-sized buts, I cannot lie. But I wonder how many people thought Liz Truss would be an improvement on Boris Johnson. Probably not many, actually. But if you did think Liz Truss would be an improvement upon Boris Johnson, it would only have been because of the absolute awfulness of Boris Johnson. So if you could recognise the absolute awfulness of Boris Johnson, you probably weren't likely to look warmly. Anyway, enough from me. Harriet's in Kingston upon Thames. Harriet, what would you like to say?
Sorry, I wanted to first of all say that, you know, he did that spring statement at the beginning of the year, which everyone was generally appalled by because it was so tone deaf and people were like, oh my God, people are going to be even more in crisis. And I found it really distasteful that he had that very expensive, very slick, ready for Richie campaign during a cost of living crisis. You know, yes, I agree with getting rid of Boris. It shows that he's a bit duplicitous, and I think that it's not that I don't know whether he's got empathy or not. He just doesn't get it, and everyone's forgotten about that spring statement.
What was it? Remind them. What was in it that you objected to particularly?
He didn't raise benefits, did he? And there was things to do with disability allowances, and people were being left out in the cold.
Right.
And I'm not an economist, but
so there wasn't enough help for the people who needed it most, in your view.
Not enough help. But I don't know if you remember that there was a ton of photographs of him with his 5,000 pieces of sheets of paper when he was getting ready, and look at how much work he's putting into it. But when he delivered it,
I just need to tell you, he's just arrived at Buckingham Palace. I do want to keep an eye on events, even as we don't focus on them to the exclusion of all else. It is still a historical moment, even though they come around more regularly than buses these days. He's making his way into Buckingham Palace now, which is a remarkable moment given his family's history, his family's heritage. But for the time being, at least, I'm more interested in what you have to say. Why? Because I can do the out of touch. I can see it. I know where you're coming from. Why does it bother you? It's not a guarantee. Tony Benn was probably one of the most ideologically pure left-wingers this country has ever seen, and he lived a life of relative luxury. He had he gave up a title, but his oldest son, I think, has resumed it, and there was a family pile, I think, or certainly a beautiful house in Holland Park. So it's not an exclusion. It's not. It doesn't disqualify you from.
I went to a very, very, very expensive boarding school that's sort of renowned, and I feel I feel like I'm permanently skinned all the time. I'm worried about petrol money, but I find it very distasteful that he would deliver such a slick, expensive campaign. Ready for Rishi.
How was it expensive? It's just people. It takes the same amount of time with technology and software these days. And I concede before I continue that this is not my greatest field of expertise. But I don't think the slickness of a social media campaign reflects how much money has been spent on it.
I do.
Really? You've got Nadine Dorries typing her tweets with her thumbs on one hand. It costs the same amount of money. Well, I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. But Sunak's slickness, you have a point, clearly, because he abandoned it for the last week, or the stuff coming out. He got rid of the signature on the bottom of it. But why did it bother you so much?
It bothered me because it was so eye on the prize,
right.
eye on the prize,
okay.
eye on the top job. And also, can I just say one thing as well? I know that he did the furlough scheme, and I'm not an economist,
no.
But we're in a lot of trouble because of the furlough scheme. Other countries are not. If they, we didn't close our borders. He was part of the cabinet. He was the second man in charge.
Yeah.
Didn't close our borders. We rolled out a furlough scheme, and like I heard somebody else say, the disgusting waste and the write-offs and the PP that didn't happen, and the fact that they didn't put their contracts out for tender and all of that. He was there. He was there. He was there. That makes me very, very, very upset. And, I haven't forgotten the Spring Statement.
I hear you. I've got it all on my list. And this is substance, isn't it? This is things he's done politically.
Yeah. And then he was very, very thin-skinned, and we know. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but and he's really thin-skinned, and you know what? You're in politics.
What was he thin-skinned about?
Oh, his family and his wife's money, and moving his family out of 11. Is he going to move them back into 10? Is he not going to do that? Is he? Isn't he? It's all so contrived, and it's all about a man with a purpose who's very stylized, very slick, doesn't really understand. I don't think.
No, but if he's very good at sums. There might be a case for. I don't know that he is. He did PPE. He didn't do economics. He did PPE like all the rest of them did. And it's much closer to my degree than
I tell you, I wouldn't want to be his chancellor. I don't think his chancellor will have a quiet moment. I think he'll have his nose in the chancellor's office and in his own office as well. I just think he had his eye on the prize. He'd got what he wanted, and I just think the way he did it was pretty distasteful. And there's a lot of people who are genuinely struggling.
I think this is going to be key. Certainly we've already obviously broken the seal on calls that describe decisions that you wouldn't wish upon your worst enemy and circumstances that are awful. It's the little story today about prepay meters and 10,000 a month now being installed after years of seeing the number of people with prepaid electricity meters actually declining. But these are I think electricity companies almost insisting on it that people who may not be able to pay their bills are going to have a sort of de facto disconnection of their electricity. If you haven't got the money in the house to charge up your card and load up your meter, then you're not going to be able to have electricity in your house. And that's terrifying. And the idea of Rishi Sunak truly understanding that, I do think is a problem. I do think it's close to impossible. But I don't know enough about him to say that with certainty. I appreciate you don't either. But it has to be an issue. It's not just having gone to a fancy school like Harriet did or like I did, and possibly having some luck and privilege that means you're insulated from some of the worst impacts of the cost of living crisis. It's floating so far above it, so far above the cost of living crisis, that it's, I think, a reasonable question to wonder whether he can even see it as clearly as everybody else can. And there's also the question of, why would you want to go into politics if you are Rishi Sunak? It's not as if he wants to change the world, because it's a world that has delivered untold riches to him and his family. So he must be more or less happy with the status quo. You balk at the thought that he doesn't think the status quo is skewed enough in favour of people like him. I suppose some people go into politics to make the world a better place for people like them. Usually conservatives, Labour people, rightly or wrongly, also go into the world, traditionally into the world of politics, to make things better for people like them, because they used to come from the trade union movement or working class backgrounds. That changed in recent years, although the pendulum is swinging back now. Why does Rishi Sunak want to be in politics? The only answer I've got is vanity. I don't know, or status, a pursuit of status. I can't see him sitting there and thinking, I really want to create a world where people don't have swimming pool extensions that cost more than the average home in a country, while millions up and down the same country are struggling to choose between heating and eating. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you to Martin for saying, I love your broadcasting, but what do you think the E in PPE stands for? I do know that the E in PPE stands for economics, but it's a form of economics, if you do it at Oxford, that it's not heavy on sums, it's fair to say. I speak as a graduate of the London School of Economics, and the difference is pretty clear. 11:13 is the time. Michael is in Stansted. Michael, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
we spoke last week, and we both predicted entirely what would happen in terms of Truss and now Rishi as a safe pair of hands. But I was interested in your question from the point of view of who is he?
Yeah.
His wealth, the wealth is a huge defining factor. I mean,
He wasn't born with it. He didn't grow up with it. I mean, he grew up better off than most, but nowhere near in the percentage he's in now.
Look at the rest of the country and say he's part of that privileged few to make the choices that put them in the right places at the right time. And I think wealth is a huge part. I was minded that, to me, he's a bank manager. To me, he's your...
Yeah, but bank managers used to be the most trusted members of society.
And I think, if you said to me, do I trust Rishi to make decisions with a spreadsheet? You do trust him to make decisions with a spreadsheet? Oh, I think he can use a spreadsheet. I think what he did with Liz Truss is he sat there and he said she was a cleaner applying for a £5 million mortgage, and he said, you don't have the credit, madam.
Yeah,
I can't give you a mortgage because it doesn't.
Just nudge me to what your criticism is, apart from him being very rich, if you would, because I'm not entirely clear at the moment.
I think that what you're asking is, what can we see of him? And I'm not criticising him. He's a biscuit eater. We are all biscuit eaters now, Michael. He is genuinely comes into the room. He sits. You give him your figures. He will eat the biscuits, drink the tea, and go away. He'll tell you whether you get your loan. He is bland, and I would say to James, you said,
I think you're wrong. I feel he's a Thatcherite. There's nothing bland about Thatcherism.
I couldn't disagree more.
No, we shall see then, won't we?
He's not a Thatcherite. He's not a Brexiteer. He's not a Remainer. He's not a West.
He is a Brexiteer. He's an ardent Brexiteer. He wrote articles at school about why Brexit would be a good idea.
It's not the definition of the man. What will happen now is that the country...
Go on. You've got 30 seconds left, because I'm not really following you, Michael.
The 65 million... shareholders in UK PLC will now show him what happens when you say there's no dividend and there's no money and you're not going to, your share value's gone down, and they're going to turn on it.
Okay, we shall see. 60 minutes after 11 is the time.
This is LBC. LBC.
I suppose if you were searching for something pithy to say in the pub, you could probably argue that Rishi Sunak is almost certainly going to be awful from the perspective of people who don't share the interests of mega-rich Goldman Sachs bankers, but he will at least be conventionally awful. Boris Johnson's corruption was of a type and a scale that, unless you're familiar with Donald Trump, you would not recognise in the context of Western politics, or certainly not the Anglosphere. He might stand comparison with a Berlusconi, perhaps, or in some ways an Orban, but not with any prime ministers or presidents who had gone before. And so with Liz Truss's incompetence. It was an unconventional incompetence. It was an extraordinary incompetence. Whatever Rishi Sunak's failings turn out to be, I'm currently quietly confident they will be conventional failings. They will be precedented failings. They will be ordinary failings. They will not be extraordinary. But we're still canvassing reactions to his elevation, what it means to you, and perhaps most importantly for me at least, what we know about him. 0345 6060973. Ben's in Brighton. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
first time caller here.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Firstly, so I'm a son of Iranian refugees, which is perhaps a bit more topical than it should be right now. But
yes.
I wanted to just comment on the kind of, Rishi representation point. Look, firstly, let me just qualify it by saying that I don't begrudge anyone being happy about representation. I completely sort of understand it and appreciate it. But that being said, sort of my personal feeling is that it's actually kind of meaningless. If we think of like MLK's, great speech of "I Have a Dream" and stuff, and he said,
you say great. I don't know if you heard Liz Truss's speech earlier. Right?
Yeah, I mean, Seneca quotes aside and stuff, but he says there's that famous line about judging people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, and I think that's actually quite apt in this instance. The kind
I mean, isn't the appointment of a Prime Minister with Indian heritage, a British Prime Minister, an English Prime Minister with Indian heritage, isn't that a step towards Dr. King's dream?
Yes and no. I mean,
give me the no, because I can work out the yes.
Well, I think again, not to kind of.
No, I understand that. You don't need to qualify it. I just want to know. I want to hear it in your words, because I'm uncomfortable as a white bloke trying to lecture you on why the appointment. Do you see what I mean?
I appreciate it. Look, we've got to have these conversations.
Yes, I think we do.
I think it's our experiences that shape us rather than our ethnicities, and of course, our ethnicities can shape our experiences. But to me, the richer
you are, the less likely that is to happen. I think probably.
Yeah, exactly. So the message that this sends is that a minority or a person of color or whoever can be prime minister or have the highest office or whatever, but in order to do so, you have to go to public school for 46k a year, have aristocratic friends, upper class friends, definitely not working class friends,
Okay.
And
that's a quote if you're not familiar.
yeah, that wasn't me.
No. I'll introduce the denial of discrimination that this government was riding high on not that long ago, and pushing forward people like Kemi Badenoch to tell us that there was no such thing as institutional racism. Because I can't argue with her or with him if they sign up to that. I can argue with Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson. You can argue with both of them, of course.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, look, I think I was saying this to your researcher earlier, I think I have more in common with a white working class person like Angela Rayner or whoever than I do with Rishi, and I think that's something that speaks volumes. So I think it's a bit of a false dawn and a red herring, and it can be. I'm not saying it is, but it can be a bit dangerous because, like you say, it brushes institutional racism and other things under the carpet.
There'll be a certain type of fraudster queuing up to claim that this is proof that the Conservative Party isn't racist or doesn't have a problem with racism. Even as the members are queuing up to say, "Oh, well, I couldn't vote for him, so I had to go for Liz Truss." The low-level racists will love the opportunity to pretend that this proves something profound about their party.
And don't get me wrong, I am enjoying the fact that this. Let me choose my words carefully. This boils the urine of particular racist, voters and stuff. I appreciate that. I quite like that. But at the same time, I don't think. I mean, it's perhaps a small step, but I don't think it's this great, watershed moment. Look at Obama. It didn't fix any of the problems in America.
But it was also a general election. It was an election result, wasn't it? So it carries much more weight.
Obama also bombed Africa more than any other president.
This is true. Yes,
these things are.
I suppose we're all seduced by the simplicity of things sometimes, Ben, and I'm grateful to you for reminding us of the complexity. Indeed, of course, the complexity of complexion, to coin a phrase.
Exactly.
I look forward to talking to you again. I enjoyed that a lot.
Awesome.
And no, thank you. And for the record, in full disclosure, I'm uncomfortable arguing with people of colour about why it's a bigger deal than they acknowledge it to be. So there it is, or people, with immigrant backgrounds. I find it odd when politicians whose family were immigrants themselves, whose parents came here from overseas, adopt a very, very right-wing attitude to immigration. It's got absolutely nothing to do with ethnicity. But again, of course, the kind of people pretending today that this is proof that the Tory party isn't racist will be the kind of people who like to pretend that if you make a comment about families with a history of immigration, it being odd that they might produce a politician who's passionately opposed to immigration. But there are plenty of people who try to pretend that could have anything to do with ethnicity or colour as well. It's the potentially new Home Secretary, Dominic Raab, who troubles me most in this context, is how you could end up with the son of an actual refugee ending up in charge of the department that is going to be, one imagines, charged with ramping up still further the vile animosity towards modern-day refugees. Here's a text I'll read out. I met Jill last week. Indeed, she points this out. Hi, it's Jill here, the gobby Asian at your show in Bewdley last week, and indeed the only Asian in the village, or in the room at least. It's purely egotistical, James, and power-driven, in fact. I thought he wouldn't go for it, as his pride had been damaged the first time round. But as a fellow Asian, whether he rises or falls, he can dine out on this role for the rest of his life and assume a higher ground than all of the many white prime ministers who are, of course, ten a penny in comparison. It's power and ego that run this Conservative party. She had P.S. I love you. I love you too. I love Theo Usherwood as well, who's back in the studio because presumably King Charles is now inviting Rishi Sunak to form a new government. He then hops back in his limo, pedals back to Downing Street and delivers a speech from a new lectern.
It's so exciting.
New lectern alert. Is this like in Doctor Who when a new doctor gets a new TARDIS?
Precisely.
Okay.
So a new Prime Minister has a new lectern. Liz Truss had the Jenga lectern, which was this lectern which was sort of made up with different blocks of wood. And
it was supposed to be from all different trees.
Yeah, they had it from different parts of the United Kingdom.
Exactly.
And then they had to sort of cut costs.
Because it was probably going to get out how much it cost.
Yeah.
But your bespoke carpentry is very, very expensive.
Exceptionally expensive. Anyway, there are two of them, by the way. Anyway, Rishi Sunak has a new lectern, which, of course, it should just to remind listeners, he's 5'7", which is the same height as Emmanuel Macron, the French president. So It's also about making sure that the lectern is at the right height for the new Prime Minister.
He needs a little lectern.
Yes, a smaller lectern.
Okay.
So he's got his new lectern, and that's been placed out in Downing Street in preparation for when he arrives there. He's still looking at pictures. He's still speaking to the King. And being invited to form a new government, and then he will be, it's only, a 5-minute drive, less than that, from Buckingham Palace into Downing Street, and then straight from his Prime Minister's car to give a speech and announce exactly what he plans to do as Prime Minister.
Lionel Messi.
5'7".
Yeah.
Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, 5'7".
Robin Williams.
5'7".
Angelina Jolie.
5'7".
Beyonce.
5'7".
Tom Cruise.
5'7".
Jeff
But
Bezos.
he wears the heels, doesn't he, Tom Cruise?
Say that, he'll sue you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sandra Bullock.
5'7".
Bob Marley.
5'7".
I love Google. I was doing all that off the top of my head. 29 minutes after 11, so we'll take the news. I don't think he's going to be back.
No, he's not going to get
time. And this won't be the new lectern, will it? This will be the standard lectern, the standby lectern, because he won't have been able to commission a new lectern yet.
Yes, they could build these things quickly, yeah.
How long does it take to make a lectern? Don't at me.
I don't know. But it's a bespoke lectern.
I'm trying to get a door for my loft. It's impossible.
You're not the Prime Minister, James. You're only James O'Brien.
That's very true. And in fact, memento mori, it's very good of you to remind me of that, picking up on Liz Truss's Roman references earlier. The conquering generals would have a slave marching with them back into Rome. Do you know this?
Yeah,
whispering in their ear, memento mori, remember you are mortal. Yeah. Time now for the very latest news headlines with Holly Harris. 26 minutes to 12 is the time. Theo Usherwood is with me, LBC's political editor, one of the hardest working men in London, of course, at the moment. We should have a little rest now, shouldn't we?
No, we've just got the official announcement that Rishi Sunak has become Prime Minister.
No, I know that. I meant in terms of now that he is Prime Minister, he's going to last longer than 45 days.
Yes. I think he will last longer than 45 days.
We got that on tape. He has to last longer. He has to last longer than 45 days.
Yeah, he will last longer than 45 days because if the Conservative MPs decide that they want to get rid of him, it's very difficult to see how they avoid a general election. So I'd expect. I don't think anybody's suggesting that it would be shorter.
No, of course they're not. So we've had the handshake. He's met King Charles.
Looks like a cordial meeting from official photographs that are being released by the palace. And the same room, I understand, as where the Queen met prime ministers when they went to Buckingham Palace.
Fascinating. And now he makes his way back.
There are a choice of rooms at Buckingham Palace.
It's a very big building, Theo.
It's not like going around to Nans for tea.
Well, actually, if you say that again, then it's very important.
But sorry, I'm just trying to fill
in. It's in the same room. We don't need to fill. I've got a full switchboard and an unfolding political story as it happened. I've got Usma in Blackburn waiting on the line. You don't need to be telling. You don't need to be telling people that it was in the same room that Liz Truss met him. Well, maybe you do. I'm really bad at this stuff. Maybe people care about that. Maybe you've got a much better handle on what the people want than I do. So at some point in the very near future, Rishi Sunak will start speaking outside Downing Street, and we will cross live to that, and then you and I will pick over whatever it is.
And then we'll get the announcements from the cabinet. Who's in the cabinet?
He's not a great speaker, is he? Either he's not one of those. But then everyone thought Johnson was a great speaker, and he was just a great big pillar.
He messed it up last night, and they obviously relied on the auto cue, and it went wrong. But he's better than what happened last night.
Do it without auto cue. That'd be my advice. Just wing it. Just play it by ear. Let's go to Usma, who's in Blackburn. What made you pick up the phone, Usma?
Just to say, I remember when Obama won, and even thinking of Britain, when David Cameron appointed Sajid Javid after that, when he won the election, and he was the first Asian, member of the cabinet.
Gosh, was he?
It was a really good feeling. But this is quite hollow.
Why?
For a person of
for you,
yeah, but because had it been a victory in an election, had it been a victory even with the awful system they have of electing a Tory leader, it would be something to really celebrate. This is basically, they didn't vote him in the first place because for whatever reason, and they voted awful Truss in, and now awful Truss has messed everything up even more than it was. So now we're going to bring the guy we didn't vote in, but we're not going to get a vote to do it. So it's not, and that's, there is no victory in it because it's not if the British public had voted in an ethnic minority person as Prime Minister, wow, yeah.
It would feel different.
Yeah, but not 200 self-serving people who should actually have the
but he still gets the gig regardless of the size of the electorate. He gets the gig. The 57th Prime Minister is the son of immigrants.
Absolutely, gets the gig.
That's progress. That's progress?
The right way. No, it's not progress.
Not at all.
Didn't get the gig in the way the white men did or the white women did.
Well, that's actually not. That's not really true either, is it? I think that there's 4 out of 7.
In the case of, Theresa May, she did call an election, didn't she?
Yeah.
She was elected.
Johnson did. Johnson won an election.
Yeah. So, but I'm just saying.
I have to respect what you're saying.
History, but it's hot. But to have a victory, the British people vote in an ethnic minority prime minister. Absolutely, you'd be out there, thinking this is progress.
Okay.
This is not progress.
Well, you've got a realistic chance of the first general election being fought with one of the two major parties being led by a member of an ethnic minority.
Yes.
So that's got to be a progress, hasn't it?
Well,
when it happens.
But then if you think about him and think about the leader that he is, and listen to all the people what they're saying, regardless of the fact he's very short, very rich.
Very short and very rich.
He contributed to the current situation.
Yeah, there's quite a lot
49 days of trust does not make
undo what went before. And in fact, the stuff that happened on his watch, the fraud, the £4.5 billion worth of fraud that was lost as a consequence of his furlough, sitting there with his calculator and his...
49 days of trust does not make this mess.
And of course, he got one of those fines as well at Downing Street, although I think his defence probably was a little bit more robust than Boris Johnson's in that he turned up early for a business meeting and they happened to be having a birthday party there. He's gone on holiday by mistake or by accident. Thank you, Usma. Thank you very much. I'm in a bit of a weird position on this one in that I am arguing with people whose ethnicity is similar to Rishi Sunak's, that his elevation to Prime Minister is a bigger deal than they think it is. So obviously I don't really have the right to do that. Wes Streeting, another white man, but from a much more working class background than either me or Rishi Sunak, makes the point that kids in his constituency will see Rishi Sunak walking into Downing Street and they will think, I can do that, in a way that they have never seen it happen before. But I could take on board everything that Ben in Brighton said and Uzma in Blackburn and everybody else, perhaps raining a little bit on the parade of people claiming that this is a magical moment. 2 texts on the same subject. Please stop putting Theo down. We love him. So I have to apologise to
you. I'll say that. Thank you. You said that.
It's not signed.
Oh, check
hang on.
list.
Mrs. Usherwood.
That's the last thing my wife would say.
And this, I think...
Put your boots.
Coming from a slightly different angle. Could you ask Theo precisely which room the King met Rishi Sunak in?
I tell you, there's the same one. Just actually very quickly on the Wes Streeting point.
Yes.
Sadiq Khan has always made that point. That when he became the mayor of London, he hoped that other people, young Muslim men and women across London, would be able to say, "Well, look, there's Sadiq Khan. I can do this too."
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see the sort of racism routinely directed at Sadiq Khan, whether Rishi Sunak suffers similarly. You have to presume
it was very interesting during the hustings and in London, and there were. Liz Truss really went down the attacking Sadiq Khan line, and Rishi Sunak pulled right back from it about saying, his message...
Once again, it's the prioritisation of pragmatism over politics. Sadiq Khan is not responsible for half of the things that the Daily Mail claims he's responsible for, but Liz Truss knows that it plays well with the kind of base that doesn't really like brown people.
So, and Rishi Sunak was saying, we elect, if the Tories want to change... the mayor of London, then there are elections and we can vote him out, rather than saying that somehow, because it's Sadiq Khan, he's been foisted on London. He was elected democratically as the mayor of London twice.
Yes. There are lots of children, this is what Wes actually said, and it's a reference to a television interview from last night. There are lots of children in my constituency and beyond who will see someone who looks like them walk into number 10 today. This is a wonderful thing. We will take on Rishi Sunak on the basis of his record, his policies, and the chaos his party has caused. He's a good operator, Wes Street.
He's smart.
He's
smart. He's one to watch.
He is. Where do we go next? Glasgow or Sedbergh? You're keeping an eye on the thing. He's nowhere near Downing Street yet, is he?
No.
Okay.
All I'm doing is watching.
Let's have a word with Roddy in Glasgow. Roddy, what would you like to say? Hello, Roddy.
Good morning, James. How are you?